Today we are going to be solving equations containing fractions. So the last few days we've been working with fractions and mixed numbers, either adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing. Now we're going to use those concepts to solve some problems. So let's take a look at our first one here. We've got 1/7 plus n equals 2/3. So we're using opposite operations to solve the equations. So if this is a positive 1/7, it's positive because you don't see a sign in front of it. So that means I need to do the opposite of that, which is negative. So I'm going to subtract 1/7 from both sides. So when I do that, I've got to come up with a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply this fraction by 7/7, this one by 3/3. That way I'll have the same denominator. So let me go ahead and rewrite what I've got then. It becomes a 14/21, and then I'm going to be taking away 3/21. And so when I do that subtraction, that leaves me with 11/21. And that's the value of n. So let's take a look at our next problem. And it is similar, except that I've got the fraction on the other side of the unknown. But I do the same work. It's a positive 5/6, so that means I'm going to end up subtracting 5/6 from both sides. So when I do that, I got to come up with that common denominator. This time I just need to multiply the 6 by 3/3, and that gives me the same denominator as I have above. So I do the subtraction. Remember, I'm subtracting here because that minus sign right there. So I do 17 minus 15, and that's where I'm getting 2 from. And I bring the 18 down. And so from that point, all I have to do is reduce the fraction. So I see I can divide them both by 2. And I'm left with 1/9. And that's the value of j. Well, this one's a little different because instead of adding a fraction, I'm subtracting a fraction from the unknown. So we do the opposite operation. So this time I'm going to add 2/3 to both sides. And so when I do that, I've got to come up with that common denominator. This time I've got to multiply both fractions by a number because the denominators don't have any common factors. So when I do that, I'm left here with 15/24, and then I also have 16/24. And notice I'm adding this time, because I had to do the opposite operation, and I end up with an improper fraction of 31/24. So I just see how many times 24 goes into 31, and write the problem down right again. So I'm doing 24 into 31, and that just goes one time. Do the subtraction. Notice how you're left with 7 left over. So you write the answer as 1 and 7/24. Well, our next one has a mixed number. So when I do the work, here I have to, again, add the 2/7 because I'm doing the opposite operations. I'm adding the 2/7 to that 1/4. But I got to make sure I bring down the 3. So I got to come up with a common denominator first. So I'll multiply the top fraction by 7. The denominator, the bottom one, I'll multiply it by 4. And in so doing, I'm left with 7/28. Here I'm left with an 8/28. So I add those two fractions together, gives me 15/28. But again, as I said before, you got to bring down that 3. So 3 and 15/28 is the value of y. Well, that's when we add or subtract to solve an equation. Now we're going to have to multiply by what we call the reciprocal. So the reciprocal is when I turn the fraction upside down. And it works because when I multiply, if I have this fraction here, this 2, I can write it as a fraction as 2/1. If I multiply this by 1/2, you see the 2's will cross cancel, leaving me just with this s equals. But what I do to one side, I always have to do the same to the other. So I need to multiply that side by 1/2 as well. And that's the reciprocal. The reciprocal, again, is when you turn the fraction around. So the denominator is now in the top of the fraction, in the numerator spot. The numerator is now in the denominator spot. And again, that will cross-cancel this 2 and leave us just with the coefficient of 1 in front of the s. So I multiply across, I'm left with 3/8. And that is the answer. So that's what we're going to do with this one. This time we have 1/5, so I'm going to multiply by 5/1 to get those 5's to cross-cancel. Got to do the same thing to the other side, though. And now I'm left with an a equals 5/2. We're just going to change that to a mixed number. So 2 goes into 5 2 times with 1 left over. I got that again by doing that division. 2 times makes 4. Subtraction, you see how I have 1 left over. That goes in the numerator of the fraction. The divisor always goes in the denominator. On this next one, we're going to multiply again by the reciprocal. Multiply by 6/5. Do the same thing on the other side. Multiply by 6/5. Look for some cross-canceling on this problem. You see how 9 and 6 have a common factor of 3. You do the division, you got 3 when you divide 3 into 9, 2 when you divide 3 into 6. This 5, which is a 5, almost looks like a 3 there, this 5 and 8 don't have any common factors. Same thing as you look up and down, you don't see any common factors either. So we go ahead and multiply across, left with 16/15. And 15 goes into 16 one time, with 1 left over. So 1 and 1/15. Well, before you multiply by the reciprocal in this problem, we need to change this to an improper fraction. So we have to do 3 times 15 plus the 7. So 3 times 15 plus 15 plus the 7, that makes 45, plus 7 makes 52. So that makes 52 over 15, and it's equaling 1/2 x. So now we're ready to solve. So this is where we get to multiply by that reciprocal. 2 over 1, multiply this side by 2 over 1, and we're left with 104 over 15 equals x. Well, I just need to change that to a mixed number. So we'll see how many times 15 goes into 104. Well, I know 15 times 6 makes 90, and when I do the subtraction, I'm left with 14, and that's small enough. So we'll go ahead and write that as 6 and 14/15. Almost 7, but not quite. We've got some word problems here. It says Sarah Beth ran 1 2/5 mile on a path around the park. It doesn't say she ran all the way around the park. It just says that's as far as she went on this path. And the path was going around the park. This was 5/8 of. Okay, when I see the word of, I think of multiply. I need to multiply 5/8 by the distance around the park. Well, 1 2/5 is not the distance around the park. This is just how far she ran. We go to the question, and the question always gives us the unknown. So the question is, what is the distance around the park? We don't know. So let's say the distance around the park equals d. So I just wrote the equal sign d for the distance around the park equals d. Well, remember, 5/8 of means multiply the distance around the park. Well, the distance around the park is d, so I'm going to write down 5/8 of means multiply times d. Is means equals 1 2/5. So if you get in that habit of thinking or of saying the multiplication problem using the word of in there, you'll remember more often that of means to multiply. So 5/8 of d is 1 2/5. Is means equals. So to solve this, I need to change that 1 2/5 to an improper fraction. So 1 times 5 plus 2 makes 7/5. This equals 5/8 d. So from this point, all I'm going to do is multiply by the reciprocal. So 8/5. Get those 8s and 5s to cancel. Do the same thing over here. 8/5. And we go ahead and multiply across. I've got 56 over 25. So I do that division, 25 into 56, and it goes in there 2 times. It makes 50 with 6 left over. So 2 and 6 25ths. So I'll write that as d equals 2 and 6 over 25. And that's miles, are the units. Well, looking at our next problem, it says an interior decorator bought 12.5 yards of material to make drapes. He used 8 2/3 yards on one of the drapes, and how much material is left? Alright, so we have 8 2/3, that's what he had on one drape, plus an unknown amount, x, which is the amount he has left. So he has left here, x, equals the total that he had. So he bought this. This is a total. So that's what we started with. So 12 and 1/2. So what we need to do is do an opposite operation. I need to subtract that 8 2/3 from both sides. Subtract 8 2/3. So that means I need to come up with a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply this by 3 over 3, and this one by 2 over 2. So I'm left here with 3/6. Here I've got 4/6. And when I do the subtraction, I'm going to come up with a negative number. So I need to borrow. I need to borrow from the 12, change it to an 11, and add 1 here. So when I add 1, I'm going to write that as 6/6, because that's what 1 is. And I use that denominator because that's what the denominator of the original fraction was. So that makes 9/6. So 11 and 9/6 is the same as 12 and 3/6. So now I can do the subtraction. 9 minus 4 makes 5. So I have 5/6. 11 minus 8 makes 3. So 3 and 5/6 yards is what's left over. Well, looking at our next problem, a grizzly bear can run 1 1/5 times faster than an elephant. So the bear, we'll do B for bear here, can run 1 equals 1 1/5 times faster, times, so I'll write them right next to each other, times faster than the elephant. Elephant is E. So it says a grizzly bear can run 30 miles an hour. So I'm going to put 30 in place of B. Equals 1 1/5 E. Well, again, I need to change that 1 1/5 to an improper fraction. So 1 times 5 plus 1 makes 6/5. And so now I'm ready to solve. So I go ahead and multiply by that reciprocal. So multiply by 5/6. That'll cancel out the 6's, cancel out the 5's. But you got to do the same thing on this side. So 5 over 6. Treat that 30 as 30 over 1, so you can see the cross canceling that occurs. 6 goes into 35 times. Multiply across. That means the elephant, E, can run at 25 miles per hour. And there is our answer. Well, last problem here. It says a fruit salad recipe with bananas, strawberries, and grapes requires 3 1/2 pounds of fruit. So that's a total. That's a total. And so you need 1 3/4 pounds of bananas, 7/8 pounds of strawberries. How much of the grapes do you need? Well, let's write it this way. 3 1/2 minus, and then we've got to add these two amounts together. So we've got 1 3/4 plus 7/8. I have to add those because those two are combined together with the grapes. We just don't know what the grapes are, so we'll subtract that amount from the total. So we'll go ahead and rewrite this as 3 1/2, and then I'll go ahead and come up with that common denominator here. So I'm going to multiply this by 2 over 2. And so this makes a 1 6/8 plus 7/8, which makes, bring that 3 1/2 down, which makes 1 13/8. Well, we'll go ahead and do that, change this improper fraction so that it has the same, so that it's a proper fraction. And so 8 goes into 13. You'll see that goes in there 1 time, so minus 2. So I'm adding a 1 to this 1 here, with 5 left over, so 5/8. And so now I need to subtract these two fractions. So when I do that, I'll go ahead and multiply this by 4/4. So now I have 3 4/8, and I'm taking away 2 5/8. Well, I can't take 5/8 from 4, so I need to borrow once more. So I'll change that to a 2 and add 8 over 8. So that makes 12/8. And then I've got 2 12/8 minus 2 5/8. And the 2's cancel out, leaving me with 7/8 pounds of grapes. And that would be our answer. Well, those are the types of problems that you're going to see on tonight's homework. Good luck.